So now we're going to go to 1 Corinthians 15, if I can learn how to spell, C-O-R, and see what it has to say there. Because this one is probably the second most cited proof text of the rapture, where Paul says this, verse 51, "Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed." He's talking about the same thing, right? That was in 1 Thessalonians 4. What was he talking about? He was talking about the difference between those who have already died and those who are going to live up until the coming of the Lord, right? Same thing here. Same exact context. "Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet." Okay? So there's that trumpet again. This time we're given a little bit more detail. Paul calls it the last trumpet. He doesn't call it the last trumpet in 1 Thessalonians 4. He just says it's the trumpet of God, right? Here he says that, and keep in mind, this idea that we shall not all sleep, but we shall be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, that is for evangelicals describing the rapture. I defy you to find any sermon by your pastor or any pastor about the rapture that doesn't allude to or adduce directly this passage, in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, right? Which is what they understand to be this rapture that snatches the church out of the world and signals the beginning of the ticking of God's prophetic time clock again, because he's got 7 more years to deal with Israel before he returns, right? Which, by the way, you know, there's no, in dispensationalism, there is no imminent return of Christ. The second coming of Christ is not imminent. It's not something that could happen at any moment. But instead, it happens exactly 7 years after the rapture, right? And so this idea that, the second coming is supposed to be this unheralded, like lightning flashes from the east and the west, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. But not in dispensationalism, not according to evangelical eschatology, because they know exactly when the second coming will happen. It'll happen exactly 7 years after the rapture, exactly 3.5 years after the abomination of desolation, where the Antichrist enters into a newly rebuilt Jewish temple on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem next to the Dome of the Rock, and like sacrifices a pig on the altar and proclaims himself to be God and says, if you don't worship me, you'll die, right? 3.5 years after that, the second coming happens, right? So much for an imminent second coming, and unheralded, like a thief in the night. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. Okay, so this event he's describing, which is the same event that he was describing in 1 Thessalonians 4, happens at the last trumpet. Okay, keep that in mind. "For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed." So do you see how he's describing the exact same thing as he was in 1 Thessalonians 4? The dead in Christ will rise first, then we who are alive and remain will be caught up together with them in the clouds. So the dead will be raised imperishable, and we who are going to live up until this time shall be changed. And interestingly, again, Paul is making the same assumption that he made in 1 Thessalonians 4. He's assuming that he himself will be among those that live all the way up until these events, this event where the Lord comes again, right? So he assumes it in 1 Thessalonians. He assumes it again. We who are alive and remain, we shall be changed. He assumes it here in 1 Corinthians 15 because Jesus assumed it. Jesus, if you're just reading according to the basic meaning of words, Jesus thought that these events were going to happen within his own lifetime and within the lifetime of his disciples. The perishable puts on imperishable, the mortal puts on immortality, describing the resurrection. Then shall come to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? Okay? So that's important. Paul is describing And it makes perfect sense if you understand the context of 1 Corinthians 15. He's describing resurrection. He's describing the final resurrection. The whole chapter, it's his magnum opus on the topic of resurrection, right? The whole thing is like, if Christ is not raised, your faith is vain. If Christ is not raised, our preaching is in vain. What will the resurrection of the body be? And he describes like an acorn and an oak tree and, all this, right? The whole thing, the whole chapter is about resurrection. And so at the end, it makes sense that he's going to culminate his magnum opus on the topic of resurrection by talking about the final resurrection, right? This is what he's describing here, is the final resurrection of all people, okay? He's describing the second coming of Christ. And you might object and say, no, he's not. He's describing the rapture. There's nothing in there that says anything about a rapture. There's nothing in the entire New Testament that says anything indicating that there'll be some rapture that happens 7 years or 3.5 years before the second coming. If you just read it according to basic words and their meanings, okay? He is describing the second coming of Christ because it's not the first coming. Christ is coming, but it's not the first time. He already came the first time. That's what Advent is, right, and Christmas. This is describing the second coming, and at the second coming, there will be a resurrection of people, okay? And he's describing this as happening in a moment in the twinkling of an eye when we shall be changed, okay? And it's at the last trumpet, not just at God's trumpet, as in 1 Thessalonians 4, but this is at the last trumpet. The trumpet will sound, and then shall come to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? And so when the events of 1 Thessalonians 15 transpire, they signal the end of death. Like death is no more. There's no more death. Okay? Then shall be brought to pass that saying, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your sting? O grave, where is your victory? Okay? This presents all kinds of problems for the evangelical eschatology, because according to them, this event in 1 Corinthians 15, like the one in 1 Thessalonians 4, is describing the rapture. But after the rapture, there's going to be 7 years of tribulation, which if you read the book of Revelation, according to what they think the tribulation is, there's all kinds of death. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people are dying due to plague and war and famine, right? And thirst. All these people, after the last trumpet has sounded, according to Paul in 1 Corinthians 15, after that, where death is supposedly eliminated, death is swallowed up, right? According to them, there's all kinds of death during the 7-year tribulation. And then, according to them, there is a 1,000-year reign on earth where presumably people will die, right? And so this idea that Paul says that there will be a second coming, and concomitant with that, a resurrection of those who died in Christ and a transformation of those who are alive up until his second coming, when all of mankind is resurrected and glorified, and death is eliminated, right? But according to them, they've got to put 7 years here in between these events. They've got to sandwich like a 1,000-year reign in there someplace, right? And it does violence to and fails to do justice to the simple timeline that Paul is talking about.